Welcome to a Moment in Time podcast. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Freya. Usually when we look back at ancient history, there's this expectation of just monumental ego.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like if you wander through any museum and you look at the ancient Egyptian exhibits, you're looking at these massive granite statues or, reading a towering stone stele, and there is always a king loudly proclaiming his identity.
Right. It's a very aggressively visible culture.
Exactly. I mean, they carve their names deep into the stone so they can't be easily sanded off. It's all, I am this king. I conquered this land. I crushed these enemies. It's clean. It's explicit. But then you step into the world of biblical history, and specifically if you look at the most famous story of them all, which is the Exodus. Suddenly, the biggest, baddest antagonist in the entire ancient narrative is, well, he's practically a ghost.
Yeah.
We're looking at a historical landscape that is completely murky, all because the text just refuses to give us a name.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, you have this towering figure who supposedly brings an empire to its knees, and the ancient text just sort of shrugs and refers to him by his job title.
Right. And that is exactly our mission for you today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are embarking on a massive cross-disciplinary CSI investigation of the ancient world.
It's going to be fun.
It is. Our goal is to solve one of the greatest whodunits of human history, which is identifying the unnamed pharaoh of the Exodus. Now, the reason we are doing this is because you love connecting the dots. You love having those moments where the puzzle pieces finally snap together, but, without feeling like you're drowning in a sea of academic jargon.
Right. We want to keep it accessible.
Exactly. So to make that happen, we've pulled together this incredible stack of source material today. We're synthesizing encyclopedic breakdowns of Egyptian dynasties, detailed field reports from biblical archaeology societies, and historical deep dives from the Armstrong Institute.
Yeah, and we aren't just going to sit here and read a timeline at you.
No, definitely not. This is really a masterclass in how we reconstruct truth from ancient data that is fragmented, degraded by time, and very often politically spun by the people who carved it into the rock in the first place.
Which is really the core of archaeological science, right? We have to look at the silences just as closely as the loud declarations.
The silences, I like that.
Yeah, so our goal today is to weave together chronological math, linguistic clues, and physical artifacts to build a psychological and historical profile of this culprit. And by the end, the profile we build is going to point in one very specific, virtually undeniable direction.
Okay, I am so ready to unpack this. So I want to start with the most glaring issue here, which is the missing name. It is objectively crazy that the books of Genesis and Exodus just call this guy Pharaoh.
It does seem weird to our modern ears, yeah.
It feels like a massive oversight by the authors, especially because later in the Bible, they have no problem naming Egyptian kings. We see names like King Shishak, King Necho, King Hafra. So what is going on with the sudden amnesia in the early books? Did they just forget who it was?
Well, no. That missing name is actually the first major clue in our investigation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. To understand why it's missing, you have to understand the specific era we're dealing with. So during a massive chunk of Egyptian history called the New Kingdom period, which runs roughly from about 1570 to 1070 BCE, it was the standard cultural convention to refer to the ruler simply by the title pharaoh without attaching a personal name in diplomatic or foreign texts.
Wait, so just pharaoh was like the official way to refer to them?
Exactly. The word pharaoh literally translates to great house, referring to the royal palace. So it was a metonymy, kind of like how journalists today might say the White House released a statement.
Oh, okay, that makes total sense. Because if you read a history book that just says, the president fought a civil war and freed the slaves, you don't need the author to clarify whether it's Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. You just know based on the era.
Right, exactly. And this convention shifted over time. It wasn't until the 10th century BCE that it actually became standard practice in the ancient Near East to juxtapose the title with the personal name.
Okay.
So the fact that the Exodus text just says Pharaoh actually strongly implies that the source material was written during the New Kingdom period when that was the norm, rather than hundreds of years later.
Wow, so the meta name actually validates the age of the text.
Yes, but there's a second angle here too, a theological one.
Okay.
In the ancient Near East, there's this deeply ingrained concept of blotting out an enemy's name. We see this in texts like Isaiah 26. In their worldview, to erase someone's name from history was the ultimate punishment. It destroyed their legacy and their afterlife.
Oh, I see.
So leaving the pharaoh unnamed in the Exodus account might have been a deliberate mocking literary choice. Denying him any historical glory while elevating the names of two lowly Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who defied him.
Oh, that is such a subtle burn. Just immortalizing the midwives and leaving the most powerful man on earth nameless.
It really is.
But, nature abhors a vacuum, and so does Hollywood.
Yes, they do.
Because we don't have a name in the text, pop culture just decided to pick one for us. I mean, if you watch The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston or, the animated movie The Prince of Egypt, the bad guy is always Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great.
Right.
It is so ingrained in our culture that most people assume it's just an absolute historical fact that Ramesses fought Moses.
It is arguably the greatest Hollywood historical myth of all time.
Really, the greatest.
I'd say so. And, well, to be fair to the filmmakers and the historians who support this theory, they do have one specific piece of textual proof they always point to. In Exodus 1.11, the text says that the Israelite slaves were forced to build the treasure cities of Pithom and Ramses.
Okay, yeah, I have to play devil's advocate here because how do we ignore that? The Bible explicitly names a city Ramses, and we know from the archaeological record that Ramesses II literally built a massive capital city called Pi-Ramesses.
Right, located in an area known as Qantir.
Yeah. It feels like the text is handing us the answer on a silver platter, so why doesn't that just close the case right there?
Because when you look at the larger chronological math provided by the historical texts, the Ramses theory completely falls apart.
Okay, walk me through the math.
We have to look at an anchor point in 1 Kings 6.1. That text explicitly states that the Exodus happened exactly 480 years before King Solomon began building his temple in Jerusalem.
Okay, and Solomon's temple is something we can date securely. I mean, do we know exactly when that was?
Highly securely. Historians widely date the beginning of Solomon's temple construction to roughly 967 BCE.
Okay, so 967.
Right, so if we do the basic arithmetic 967 plus the 480 years mentioned in the text, we land perfectly at 1446 BCE. That places the Exodus squarely in the middle of the 15th century BCE.
Okay, and let me guess. Ramses II wasn't alive in the 15th century BCE?
Not even close. Ramesses the Great lived in the 13th century BCE. His reign started around 1279 BCE.
Why?
So he is essentially 2 centuries too late for the party.
Wait. If the Exodus happened in the 1400s BCE, long before Ramesses II was even born, how on earth is his city, Ramses, mentioned in Exodus 1.11? I mean, that's a massive contradiction, isn't it?
It looks like one. Until you understand how ancient texts were preserved and edited over generations. This is what historians and textual critics call an anachronism.
Anachronism.
Yeah. An anachronism happens when a later scribe or editor updates an ancient location with a more modern, recognizable name so their contemporary readers know where the story is taking place.
Could you give an example of how that works in practice? Because, I mean, it sounds a little bit like convenient rule bending to save the timeline.
I get that, but it's actually a very common practice in historical writing. Think about a modern historian writing a book about Julius Caesar. The historian might write a sentence like, Caesar launched a massive campaign to conquer France.
Right.
Now, obviously, in Caesar's time, that landmass was called Gaul. The nation-state of France didn't exist. But the historian uses France because a modern reader understands exactly what piece of geography they're talking about. Ancient scribes did the exact same thing to ensure the text remained comprehensible to their audience.
I see. Okay, so centuries after the Exodus, some editor is looking at the original text, sees the ancient name of the city, and thinks, well, nobody knows where this old ruin is anymore. Let's update it to Pi-Ramesses, which is standing there right now.
Precisely. And we see the same scribal updating earlier in the book of Genesis. Genesis 47.11 says, the patriarch Jacob and his family settled in the land of Ramses when they first arrived in Egypt.
Oh, and nobody thinks Ramesses was alive during Jacob's time.
Exactly. Nobody, not even the most hardcore Ramesses proponents, argues that Ramesses II was alive back in the days of Joseph. It's clearly a later editorial update. We actually know from the archaeological sources that the shiny new city of Pi-Ramesses was built right over and adjacent to the ruins of a much older, massive city called Avaris.
Okay, Avaris.
And Avaris was the actual site of these events.
Yeah.
Ironically, Ramesses' great capital only lasted about a century anyway. The specific branch of the Nile it was built on literally dried up.
No way.
Yeah, the Egyptians were forced to dismantle the city, cannibalize its stones, and move their entire capital 20 miles north to a place called Tanis.
That is wild. So the city name isn't a timestamp for when the events happened. It's a timestamp for when the text was later edited.
Exactly.
That is fascinating. Okay, so Hollywood is wrong. We are officially shifting our timeline back 200 years. We're leaving the 13th century and planting our flag in the 15th century BCE. But if we're going to start pointing fingers at 15th century pharaohs, we have to establish the scene of the crime first. We need physical, tangible evidence that supports this shift. Because if the Israelites weren't in Egypt in the 1400s, this whole theory just dies on the vine, right?
And the evidence for their presence in that earlier era is absolutely staggering, especially when you look at the demographic shifts in northern Egypt. If we go back a bit before our 15th century target, to a time called the Second Intermediate Period, northern Egypt, also known as Lower Egypt, because the Nile flows north, was actually ruled by a foreign people known as the Hyksos.
Okay, wait, who are the Hyksos?
The word Hyksos roughly translates to rulers of foreign lands. They were Semitic peoples, often described as shepherd kings, who had emigrated down from the Levant, specifically the region of Canaan.
Okay.
And they grew so numerous and powerful that they essentially took over the northern half of Egypt and ruled it for over a century, while the native Egyptians were pushed south to Thebes.
Let me stop you there, because the parallels are screaming at me right now. You have Semitic shepherd kings from Canaan ruling northern Egypt. I mean, that perfectly matches the biblical account of Joseph. His family comes down from Canaan during a famine. They're explicitly described as shepherds, and they're given the best land in Goshen, which is located exactly in northern Egypt, in the Nile Delta.
The geography and the cultural demographic are a perfect overlay. And the archaeology at that ancient city we mentioned, Avaris, which is modern-day Tel el-Dabba, backs this up beautifully.
What did they find there?
Well, when archaeologists excavated Tel el-Dabba, they didn't find traditional Egyptian architecture. They uncovered a massive Canaanite and Semitic population center that had a specific style of domestic dwelling called a four-roomed house.
A four-roomed house? Why does that matter? Can't anyone build 4 rooms?
It's not just the number of rooms, it's a highly specific architectural layout. It features a central pillared courtyard surrounded by 3 adjoining rooms. This specific blueprint is almost entirely unique to later Israelite and Canaanite settlements in the Levant. Yes, it is their cultural fingerprint. Finding an entire district of these 4-roomed houses in the Egyptian Delta is like digging up an ancient site in Rome and finding a neighborhood full of traditional Japanese pagodas. It tells you exactly who was living there.
That is incredible. So they actually brought their architectural DNA with them.
They did. And in that same city, archaeologists found a prominent palatial tomb containing the remains of a massive statue.
Oh, wow.
The statue depicted an official, but he had a mushroom-shaped hairstyle, typical of Asiatics, yellow skin paint used by Egyptians to denote northerners, and he was wearing a multicolored striped robe.
You cannot be serious. A Semitic official living in a palace in Goshen wearing a multicolored robe. That is literally the Sunday school story of Joseph's coat of many colors, sitting in the dirt of Avaris.
It's pretty amazing.
But obviously, the Israelites didn't stay powerful officials forever. The text says a new king arose who didn't know Joseph, and they were enslaved. So do we have any evidence of Semitic slaves in Egypt during this time?
We do, and this is where the sources get incredibly specific. Let's look at one of the most compelling artifacts in the archaeological record regarding this period, which is Papyrus Brooklyn 35.1446.
Okay, what exactly is Papyrus Brooklyn?
It's a document that dates to the 13th dynasty, which places it right after the era of Joseph as the oppression is beginning. Functionally, it's a domestic ledger. It lists 95 household servants belonging to a single Egyptian noblewoman named Merneptah.
Merneptah, okay.
The scribe meticulously recorded their names. The crucial detail here is that out of those 95 servants, 40 of them have distinctly Semitic names.
So almost half of this woman's slave workforce is Semitic.
Yes, and it gets even more granular.
Oh.
Among those Semitic names, linguists have identified specifically Hebrew names. There is a servant listed named Menahema, which is a feminine form of the Hebrew name Menahem. And perhaps most strikingly, there is another name on this list that translates as Shifra.
Hold on. Shifra. That is the exact name of one of the Hebrew midwives in Exodus chapter 1. The ones who defy the Pharaoh's order to throw the baby boys into the Nile.
It is the exact same name. Now, to be clear, we are not saying that the papyrus is a receipt for the specific biblical midwife.
Sure.
But what Papyrus Brooklyn proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that people with distinct, recognizable Hebrew names were living as an enslaved class in Egypt long before the 13th century timeline of Ramesses II. They're there, right where the 15th century timeline needs them to be.
That is the kind of detail that just anchors the whole story in reality. And, I mean, it wasn't just names written on a ledger, right? If these two cultures, the Egyptian masters and the Hebrew slaves, were living in this intense enmeshed pressure cooker for centuries, they must have rubbed off on each other in other ways.
Inevitably, when cultures clash and coexist like that, the most permanent fingerprint they leave on each other is linguistic. And the Hebrew text of the Exodus narrative is absolutely saturated with Egyptian loanwords.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is a massive problem for critics who claim the Exodus story was just invented by Jewish scribes hundreds of years later while sitting in Babylon. The author of Exodus had an incredibly intimate, native knowledge of Egyptian culture, topography, and language.
How does an Egyptian loanword work in ancient Hebrew? I mean, give us a sense of what we're missing when we read this in English.
Let's take the famous story of baby Moses being placed in the river. The English text says his mother put him in a basket or an ark. The Hebrew word used for that vessel is tibat.
Tibet. Okay.
The fascinating thing is tibat is not a standard Hebrew root word. It derives directly from the Egyptian word dbjt, pronounced something like debet, which means a box or a chest.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, the materials used to make the basket, the reeds, the bulrushes, the pitch, used to seal it against the water. Every single one of those words has an Egyptian etymology. The Hebrew word for the specific reeds along the riverbank is twaifai, which is unquestionably borrowed from the ancient Egyptian language.
So the very vocabulary used to describe the landscape of the oppression is Egyptian. What about the name Moses itself? Because I've always heard it meant drawn out of the water in Hebrew.
Well, it does function as a Hebrew pun in the text, but
Yeah.
there is widespread agreement among Egyptologists and linguists that the name Moses derives from a very common Egyptian suffix, munksai, pronounced like Mos or Moses.
Okay.
This root word means born of or drawn out. You see it attached to the names of gods and famous Egyptian royal names everywhere during this period. Thutmose means born of the god Thoth. Almos means born of the moon god Aya. Ramos means born of Ra.
Wow, okay.
So when the pharaoh's daughter adopts this baby, she gives him an appropriately royal Egyptian name, Moses.
It's literally hiding in plain sight. Okay, so we have the architecture, we have the slave ledgers with Hebrew names, we have the linguistic fingerprints woven into the text. But what about the physical labor? The core memory of the Israelite slavery is making bricks out of mud and straw and having their quotas brutally increased. Do we have any visual or administrative evidence of Semitic slaves doing this specific work in the 15th century?
We absolutely do. If you want a visual, you look at the tomb painting of the vizier Rekhmire.
Rekhmire.
Right. This painting dates exactly to our target period, roughly 1470 to 1445 BCE.
Yeah.
Rekhmire was a massive figure, a high-ranking official who served under two different 15th century pharaohs. His tomb features an incredibly vivid panoramic depiction of the royal workforce. It literally shows Nubian and Asiatic, meaning Semitic slaves making bricks for the Karnak temple workshops.
Oh my gosh, what does the painting actually show them doing?
It is a step-by-step instructional manual of misery. You see slaves hauling water from a pool, mixing the dark mud with hose, packing the mud into wooden molds, and laying them out in long rows to bake in the blazing Egyptian sun. And standing right over them, depicted taller to show their authority, are Egyptian taskmasters holding heavy wooden rods.
That is chilling. I mean, it's essentially a photograph of Exodus chapter 1, but the text also mentions this incredibly cruel bureaucratic detail, right? When Moses first demands the people go free, Pharaoh retaliates by demanding they make the exact same quota of bricks, but he stops providing them with the straw needed to bind the mud together. They have to go scavenge for it themselves.
The logistics of that punishment are completely verified by Egyptian administrative documents from this era. We have a set of texts known as the Anastasi Papyri.
The Anastasi Papyri. Okay.
Yeah, these are essentially government memos. In them, we find frantic complaints from local officials lamenting a severe lack of straw for brickmaking in their districts, making it impossible to meet their quotas. We also have a leather scroll housed in the Louvre, dating to this specific era, that details the intense bureaucracy of the brickmaking industry. It lists junior officers who are held personally responsible for a strict daily quota of 2,000 bricks from the men stationed under them.
So the mechanics of the oppression, the intense daily quotas, the supply chain issues with straw, the Semitic slaves, the taskmasters with rods, this isn't mythical storytelling. These are historically verified facts of how the Egyptian administration operated in the 15th century BCE.
Exactly. We have firmly placed a massive Semitic slave population in Egypt, building state projects in the 1400s BCE.
All right, the scene of the crime is locked in. Now it is time to look at the suspects. We need to profile the Thutmose dynasty, which is the family in power leading up to our Exodus date of 1446 BCE. To figure out who is who, we need to match their reigns against the biography of Moses.
Right, and Moses' timeline is highly specific, which makes him a great measuring stick. According to the biblical text, Moses lived to be 120 years old, and his life is neatly divided into 3 distinct 40-year chapters.
3 chapters of 40 years.
Exactly. He spends his first 40 years as a prince of Egypt. He spends his next 40 years as an exile, hiding out in the wilderness of Midian. And he spends his final 40 years leading Israel through the desert after the Exodus.
Okay, let's do the math on that. If the Exodus happens in 1446 BCE, and Moses is exactly 80 years old when he leaves them out, that means he was born 80 years earlier, around 1526 BCE.
Correct.
So we look at the Egyptian king list. Who is sitting on the throne in 1526 BCE?
In 1526 BCE, the ruler of Egypt is a pharaoh named Thutmose II.
And what kind of ruler is Thutmose of Avaris? Does he fit the profile of the pharaoh who initiates the genocide against the Hebrew infants?
He fits it terrifyingly well. Thutmose is a fiercely ambitious military king. He massively expanded Egypt's borders, pushing deep into Nubia in the south and all the way to the Euphrates River in the north.
Okay, so he's a conqueror.
Right. And to fund and build the massive monuments required to celebrate his ego, he needed an endlessly expanding labor force. But, more importantly for our profile, he established a precedent for a very specific, very horrifying type of state-sponsored cruelty.
Oh, you're talking about the Aswan inscription.
Well, yes. In the Aswan inscription, Thutmose Stele boasts about a brutal military campaign into the southern region of Kush. He doesn't just claim he defeated their army, he proudly declares, carved into the stone, that he slaughtered every single male child of his enemies, leaving only one alive to be brought back as a humiliated prisoner.
That is state-sponsored androcide, the targeted, systematic killing of the male population. And that aligns perfectly with the biblical decree.
It really does.
The pharaoh of Moses' birth first orders the midwives to quietly kill the male Hebrew infants on the delivery stool. And when that covert plan fails, he issues a horrific public decree that every male Hebrew child must be cast into the Nile River to drown. Thutmose of Avaris is a man who already has the slaughter of male children on his resume.
Exactly. He had the motive controlling a massive subjugated slave population that was growing too large. And he had a documented history of employing infant slaughter as a tool of terror. Which brings us to the next critical figure in the narrative, the pharaoh's daughter who rescues Moses from the river.
Right.
Thutmose had a royal daughter named Hatshepsut. To secure the royal bloodline, she was married to her half-brother, Thutmose II. But Hatshepsut was no mere political pawn. She was an incredibly ambitious, powerful figure in her own right.
The theory that Hatshepsut is the pharaoh's daughter of the Exodus story is probably one of my favorite parts of this deep dive. Because she doesn't just stay a princess.
No, she eventually elevates herself to the status of pharaoh, ruling as a co-regent for 22 years. And her reign is a massive anomaly in the Thutmose dynasty. Unlike the ruthless warrior kings who came before and after her, Hatshepsut's reign was marked by unprecedented peace, trade expeditions, and prosperity.
Wow, a peaceful pharaoh.
Yeah, and she left remarkable inscriptions at her temple at Spios Artemidos, where she openly claimed that her heart inclined toward foreign people. She described herself as a ruler with a heart full of love and maternal care.
Empathy for foreigners. I mean, that is exactly the psychological profile you would expect from a royal princess who possessed the moral independence to defy her father's genocidal decree, reach into the Nile reeds, and adopt a crying foreign baby. It makes so much sense. But history was not kind to Hatshepsut, was it?
It was vicious to her. Decades after she died, a later pharaoh initiated a massive, systematic campaign of damnatio memoria against her.
Okay, can you break down what damnatio memoria actually looks like in practice?
It translates to the condemnation of memory.
Yep.
It is the ancient Egyptian equivalent of completely deleting someone's existence.
Oh, what?
Yeah, the state literally dispatched gangs of stonemasons throughout the entire kingdom with chisels. They violently smashed her statues. They chiseled her name and her face out of the temple walls. For the massive stone obelisks she had erected that were too big to tear down, they literally built brick walls around them to hide them from public view.
That is insane.
The goal was to ensure her soul had no name attached to the physical world, annihilating her in the afterlife.
That requires an intense, burning hatred. I mean, you don't expend that kind of national budget and labor just because you disagree with someone's tax policy. Why did they hate a peaceful, prosperous queen so much?
That remains one of the great debates in Egyptology. Many historians argue it was simply a misogynistic backlash because she was a female ruler who usurped a male role. But the sheer scale and vindictiveness of the destruction suggests something deeper, something intensely personal.
Like what?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture we are building, you have to ask a speculative but highly logical question. Was Hatshepsut blamed by later generations for adopting, educating, and nurturing the very man Moses who would eventually return to orchestrate the total economic and military ruin of the Egyptian empire?
Wow. Just imagine the fury of a later pharaoh, standing in the ruins of his kingdom after the 10 plagues, realizing that the architect of this destruction wasn't an outside invader. He was a man raised in their own palaces, educated in their own wisdom, all because of Hatshepsut's mercy. You would absolutely want to erase every memory of her from the face of the earth.
It provides a very compelling motive for the erasure, doesn't it?
Totally.
So following Hatshepsut's era, the throne is fully controlled by Thutmose III. He is universally recognized by historians as the Napoleon of Egypt. He was a brilliant, utterly ruthless military commander who conducted 17 military campaigns and expanded Egypt to its absolute territorial zenith.
And he was the man Moses was running from. Right, because Moses grows up, witnesses an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, and murders the Egyptian. When the crime is discovered, Moses is forced to flee for his life to the wilderness of Midian. And Exodus 2.23 has this very specific phrase. It says that Moses stayed in exile for many days until the king of Egypt who sought his life finally died.
Many days is a massive biblical understatement. Moses had to wait out a 40-year exile in the desert. He was essentially waiting for a dictator who simply refused to die. And this is where the timeline locks in perfectly. Thutmose III reigned for an astonishing 54 years.
54 years?
Yeah, his unusually long reign perfectly accommodates this massive 40-year chronological block of time where Moses is stuck in a holding pattern.
Okay, let's bring all these threads together. Moses is born under the baby killer, Thutmose III. He is rescued by the empathetic Hatshepsut. He flees from the Napoleon of Egypt, the long-reigning Thutmose III. He waits in the desert for decades. Finally, the dictator dies. The throne changes hands. Moses gets the call at the burning bush to return to Egypt.
Which brings us to the moment of truth. Thutmose III is dead. His non-firstborn son takes the throne. This is where the timeline, the psychological profile, the military records, and the archaeological silence all converge to give us our prime suspect for the pharaoh of the Exodus.
Enter Amenhotep II.
Yes, Amenhotep II. If you were trying to cast the role of a pharaoh with a hardened heart, a man so steeped in arrogance that he would watch his nation be systematically destroyed by plagues, rather than submit, Amenhotep II is your man.
He wasn't just a typical pharaoh then.
He wasn't just a military leader. He was a ruler who took royal ruthlessness to terrifying, almost psychopathic new extremes.
The sources outline a level of brutality that is honestly hard to stomach. Look at the Amada and Elephantine Stele. These are monuments where she's bragging about his accomplishments.
Right.
They describe Amenhotep II returning from a military campaign in Syria. He has captured 7 enemy princes, but he doesn't just imprison them or formally execute them. He has them tied upside down to the bow of his royal ship as he sails down the Nile, displaying them like hunting trophies.
It's gruesome.
Then he personally executes them and has their bodies nailed to the walls of the city of Thebes.
He was incredibly sadistic, and he wanted everyone to know it. In his 9th year on the throne, he ordered his soldiers to dig massive trenches, fill them with prisoners of war, and set them ablaze in what the ancient texts literally describe as a fiery holocaust. This is a man who casually narrated his own gruesome treatment of other human beings.
Jeez.
The biblical text describes a pharaoh who obstinately refuses to release his slave labor, despite escalating ecological and economic disasters.
Yeah.
That requires a very specific brand of megalomaniac arrogance. Amenhotep II has that arrogance carved into stone in his own words.
And speaking of that slave labor, we have to look at what Amenhotep II did in the 9th year of his reign, because to me, this is the ultimate smoking gun of this entire investigation.
It is arguably the most anomalous military event of the 15th century. In year 9 of his reign, which aligns precisely with the 1446 BCE calculated year of the Exodus Amenhotep II, launches a very hasty, very limited military excursion into the region of Canaan. And he comes back with a staggering, almost unbelievable number of captives.
Hey, how many are we talking about?
According to his own records, he brought back 101,128 prisoners of war.
Okay, we really need to stop and think about the logistics of that number for a second. Over 100,000 people. In the ancient world, how do you even manage that?
It was nearly impossible.
The logistics of feeding, watering, transporting, and physically guarding 100,000 angry prisoners as you march them hundreds of miles across a desert, it is almost unfathomable. Why on earth would a king launch a hasty, unplanned campaign just to grab 100,000 human beings?
It makes absolutely no strategic sense unless you are absolutely desperate. Unless your entire national economy, which was built on the backs of a massive multi-generational workforce of Semitic slaves, had just collapsed because that workforce literally walked out the front door.
Wow.
This Year 9 campaign doesn't look like a war of conquest. It looks exactly like a frantic, panicked attempt by a ruined king to replenish his decimated slave labor base after the Exodus.
It is the ultimate panicked reaction. The Israelites are gone, our building projects are stalled, our economy is in ruins. Go north and grab anyone you can find. But here is where the story gets really eerie. So he grabs 100,000 people. Where is he putting them? Because the biggest slave city in his empire just turned into a ghost town.
Exactly. Let's look at the archaeological fate of Avaris, that massive Semitic settlement we talked about earlier. Archaeologists conducted a process called stratigraphic analysis at Tel El Daba.
Okay, for those of us who aren't archaeologists, what exactly is stratigraphic analysis?
It's how archaeologists read the dirt. Over centuries, cities build up layers of sediment, trash, and collapsed buildings. The deeper you dig, the older the layer or stratum you are looking at. By analyzing the pottery and artifacts in a specific layer, you can date exactly when that layer was inhabited.
Makes sense.
When they analyzed the stratigraphy of Avaris, they found that this bustling, massive city was suddenly and mysteriously abandoned. There are no signs of a conquering army burning it down. It wasn't destroyed. It was just emptied out. And the latest identifiable pottery found in that final layer of occupation matches the reign of Amenhotep II perfectly. They were there, and then they were just gone.
A completely abandoned city. And what does Amenhotep II do after this? He brings back 100,000 captives in Year 9. His major slave city is empty, so what does he do for the rest of his reign?
Nothing.
What do you mean nothing? He was the most powerful man in the world.
I mean, the back half of his 26-year reign is a complete and total historical blank. After that Year 9 slave grab, the military campaigns completely stop. There are no major decrees issued. There are no significant historical texts written.
Wow.
Sir William Flinders Petrie, who is widely considered the father of Egyptian archaeology, noted that the monuments and temples commissioned during Amenhotep II's reign were abruptly left unfinished. They were just standing there amidst half-ruined halls, as if the entire workforce had just vanished into thin air.
A completely silenced kingdom? The loudest, most boastful king suddenly has nothing to say for the last 15 years of his life. But wait, if Amenhotep II is the Exodus Pharaoh, I have to push back on a major plot point here.
Sure.
Doesn't the Bible explicitly say that Pharaoh drowned in the Red Sea along with his army? Because we have Amenhotep II's physical mummy. It's in a museum. He didn't disappear into the bottom of the ocean. How do you reconcile that?
Well, that is a very common assumption, largely driven by the movies.
Yeah.
But we have to look closely at what the text actually claims. Psalm 106, which recounts the event, says that not one of the Egyptian army survived. It explicitly targets the military force. The text of Exodus itself never explicitly guarantees that the pharaoh personally rode into the water and drowned.
Oh, really?
Yeah, many ancient kings led from the rear, observing the battle from a safe vantage point.
Okay, but let's say he did ride in. Let's say his chariot got swamped and he drowned in the Red Sea. Does that mean his body is lost forever?
Not at all. Exodus 14 explicitly states that after the sea returned, the bodies of the Egyptians washed ashore. The Israelites saw them dead on the beach.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
The ancient Egyptians were absolute masters of bodily recovery and mummification. Their entire religious worldview centered on the preservation of the physical body for the afterlife. If their living god-king died in the shallow waters of the sea and washed up on the shore, his surviving retinue absolutely would have retrieved his body, brought it back to Thebes, and embalmed him.
And we do have that body, Mummy CG 61069. And when you look at the forensic history of this mummy, things get really weird.
They really do. In 1907, an anatomist named Grafton Elliott Smith was tasked with unboxing and examining the royal mummies. When he examined the body of Amenhotep II, he found something highly unusual.
What was it?
He noted in his official report that the skin over the pharaoh's entire body was thickly studded with strange small projections, tubercles, and raised lesions.
What caused them?
Smith couldn't definitively say. He speculated it might have been an unusual reaction to the natron salt baths used during the embalming process. But he also admitted it could be the physical scarring of some widespread, terrible disease that the king suffered before his death.
A disease that covers the entire body in lesions and boils. I mean, obviously we cannot medically prove a miracle from 3,500 years ago, but the parallel to the biblical plagues, specifically the plague of boils that broke out on man and beast, is literally sitting right there on his skin.
It's a striking detail. And it wasn't just physical scars. The psychological trauma of the plague seems to have haunted his final years. Late in his reign, around year 23, long after the historical silence had fallen over his administration, Amenhotep II sends a dispatch to his viceroy in Nubia, a man named User-Sedet. The letter is preserved on an artifact we call the Merneptah Stele. In this dispatch, Amenhotep II sounds deeply paranoid. He explicitly warns his viceroy to beware of foreigners, not to trust them, and very specifically, he commands him to beware of their magicians.
He is a king sitting in a ruined empire, terrified of foreign magicians. I mean, if you are a man who watched your own elite court sorcerers utterly fail to replicate or stop the cosmic horrors brought by Moses and Aaron, that kind of PTSD doesn't just go away. 2 decades later, he is still having nightmares about foreign men wielding magic. It all fits his psychological profile so perfectly.
It does.
Yeah.
But if we're truly going to let Amenhotep II in as our prime suspect, we have to address the absolute climax of the Exodus story, which is the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn.
Right, because if the biblical account is true, the angel of death swept through Egypt and killed the firstborn of every household, including the pharaohs. If that happened, it must have left a massive, undeniable crater in the royal line of succession. So who was supposed to take the throne and who actually got it?
Amenhotep II originally had an intended heir, a crown prince, logically named Prince Amenhotep. We have records of him early in the reign, but around the 20th year of his father's reign, Prince Amenhotep simply vanishes from the historical record. He does not survive to take the throne.
Wow. Okay.
Instead, a younger son named Thutmose IV is suddenly crowned pharaoh.
And Thutmose IV knows he has a massive political legitimacy problem, right? The Egyptian public knows he wasn't the firstborn. They know he wasn't groomed for the throne. He needs to explain to the populace why he is suddenly wearing the crown. So what does he do?
He pulls off one of the greatest pieces of PR propaganda in ancient history. He erects a massive 13-foot-tall granite monument called the Dream Stele. And he doesn't just put it anywhere. He places it right between the front paws of the Great Sphinx of Giza, one of the most sacred sites in Egypt.
Wait, why a dream? How does that solve his political problem?
Because of the cultural mechanics of divine right. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was a living god, the embodiment of Horus. The succession was supposed to be divinely ordained. If the natural order is broken, if the firstborn dies, the younger son needs the gods to explicitly endorse him, or the priests and the public might revolt.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so in the inscription on the Dream Stele, Thutmose IV claims that he was out hunting, fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx, and the Sphinx spoke to him in a dream. The god supposedly promised him the throne, explicitly stating that it was a divine gift, bypassing the normal rules of succession.
It is the ultimate political cover story. You don't carve a 13-foot granite billboard between the paws of the Sphinx claiming a god handed you a legal loophole in a dream unless you desperately need to explain away the sudden, unexpected death of the actual crown prince. It is a massive neon sign pointing right at the reality of the 10th plague.
Exactly. And this raises an incredibly important question about the sociology of the era. How does a culture recover from a multi-layered trauma like this? Think about what Egypt just endured.
Yeah. The total loss of their slave labor force, the destruction of their elite military chariots, the traumatic deaths of their firstborn children, the complete humiliation of their king. If Egypt was as devastated as the text claims, that level of trauma doesn't just vanish into the sand. It leaves a scar on the immediate next generation. You see the psychological fallout in the behavior of the royal family tree.
Okay, let's follow that tree. After Thutmose IV, the younger brother with the dream, we get a pharaoh named Amenhotep III. And from what I'm reading in our sources, this guy is the complete and total opposite of his sadistic grandfather, Amenhotep II.
He really is. He is a complete reversal of the dynasty's identity. Amenhotep III reigns for nearly 40 years, and during that massive span of time, he fights basically 0 wars. He abandons the Thutmosid tradition of ruthless military conquest. Instead, he becomes obsessed with building statues. Specifically, he commissions over 600 statues of a specific deity, Sekhmet.
And the crucial detail here is that Sekhmet is the Egyptian goddess of healing.
Yes, She was a fierce lioness goddess associated with plagues, but also with the power to cure them and protect the people from disease. Why is this sudden pacifist pharaoh obsessively mass-producing 600 statues of the goddess of healing?
That's a good question.
A culture only turns its entire national artistic budget toward healing when they're trying to recover from an unimaginable generational trauma.
And there's another fascinating detail from his reign that connects back to the Israelites, isn't there? The Saleb inscription.
Yes, the Saleb inscription is a monumental find. At his temple in modern-day Sudan, Amenhotep III leaves a list of conquered or recognized foreign territories. It's a standard list of name rings. But one of these rings explicitly mentions a specific group of nomadic people. The hieroglyphs translate to the Shasu of Yahweh.
The nomads of Yahweh.
It is the oldest known Egyptian reference to the God of Israel. Shasu was the Egyptian term for Bedouin or wanderers. This inscription places a nomadic people, identified by their worship of Yahweh, exactly where the biblical timeline says they should be at that moment, wandering as nomadic people in the wilderness east of Egypt during the 40-year period before they conquer Canaan.
Okay, here's where it gets absolutely wild. We've traced the economic fallout, the military silence, the trauma of the firstborn, and the obsession with healing. But what about the religious fallout? The book of Exodus explicitly states that the plagues weren't just ecological disasters, they were designed as a theological war. Exodus 12.12 says they were judgments against all the gods of Egypt.
Right.
If the Egyptian gods of the river, the sun, and the sky were publicly humiliated and proven powerless to stop the plagues, you would expect a massive religious crisis to hit the culture.
And that is exactly what happens with the very next pharaoh in the timeline, a man named Akhenaten. He does the unthinkable. He executes the most radical cultural revolution in Egyptian history. He completely abolishes the entire Egyptian pantheon.
Wait, all of them?
All of them. Thousands of years of polytheistic tradition, the worship of Amun, Osiris, Isis. He outlaws all of it. He closes the temples, cuts off the priests, and enforces a strict, unprecedented monotheism centered around one single god, the Aten, represented by the sun disk.
He just cancels the ancient religion. That is mind-boggling. But wait, I have to challenge his connection.
Okay.
Akhenaten ruled decades after Amenhotep II and the Exodus. If the plagues were the catalyst that destroyed faith in the Egyptian gods, why wouldn't the immediate next pharaoh cancel the gods? Why did it take a few generations for this monotheistic revolution to happen?
That is a very perceptive pushback, but it actually perfectly aligns with how cultural trauma works mechanically. Major paradigm shifts rarely happen overnight. When a society experiences a shattering trauma like realizing your gods are powerless to protect you from foreign magic, the immediate reaction of the survivors is usually denial and a desperate attempt to fix the broken system.
Oh, I see.
That is why Amenhotep III built 600 statues of the healing goddess. He was desperately trying to appease the old gods and make the pain stop. But by the time you get to the grandson, Akhenaten, the generational illusion is worn off. The youth look at the institutions of their parents and realize they are hollow.
Ah, so Akhenaten is the generation that finally looks around and says, these gods didn't protect my great-grandfather, they didn't protect our economy, why are we still funding these temples? Does he actually say why he's abolishing them?
He essentially does. On a massive pylon at the Karnak temple complex, Akhenaten inscribed his justification for the new religion. He wrote, "The temples of the gods are fallen to ruin. I have watched as they have ceased their appearances." He is openly, legally declaring that the traditional gods of Egypt have failed. They are absent. They are powerless.
That is incredible. Akhenaten's monotheistic revolution is the ultimate psychological shockwave of the Exodus. It is the delayed realization that the Egyptian worldview was irreparably shattered. The gods of the Nile couldn't stop the blood. The god of the sky couldn't stop the hail. The god of the sun couldn't stop the 3 days of darkness. So Akhenaten just sweeps them all off the board.
And concurrently, while Akhenaten is busy completely dismantling his own nation's religion, his foreign empire is actively crumbling. We have a massive cache of diplomatic clay tablets from his reign called the Amarna letters.
The Amarna letters.
Yes, these are letters sent from vassal kings in the Levant to Akhenaten, and they are desperate. They contain frantic pleas from Canaanite mayors begging the pharaoh for military reinforcements because a fierce group of nomadic people called the Habiru are systematically invading and conquering the land of Canaan.
The Habiru. It sounds exactly like the Hebrews, so let me get this straight. While Egypt is distracted, undergoing an internal existential religious crisis, the Israelites are actively fulfilling the next chapter of their biblical story. They are crossing the Jordan River and executing the military conquest of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua.
The synchronicity of the historical timeline is remarkable, which leads us to our final set of clues for today. To fully close the case on this 15th century timeline, we need to step out of Egypt and look at independent witnesses. If the Israelites truly left Egypt in the 1400s BCE, wandered for 40 years, and conquered the land, they should be firmly established as a recognized nation in Canaan long before the Hollywood timeline of the 1200s BCE.
And we have the receipts for that, don't we? Let's talk about an artifact called the Berlin pedestal.
Right, the Berlin pedestal. It is a fragmented stone artifact currently housed in the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. It's a victory block that would have been part of a larger monument. It features 3 name rings, which are cartouches containing the names of conquered enemies, usually depicted with bound prisoners.
Okay.
2 of the rings are clearly legible as the Canaanite city-states of Ashkelon and Canaan. The 3rd ring is partially damaged, but it has been reconstructed by top linguists as reading Israel.
Israel, sitting right there on an Egyptian monument next to Ashkelon.
Yes. And what is crucial here is the orthography of the word.
Okay, you're going to have to explain orthography to us. How does the way a word is spelled act as a timestamp?
Orthography is simply the conventional spelling system of a language. Languages evolve over time. Think about how different Shakespearean English from the 1600s looks compared to modern English today. If you find a letter that uses thou and hast, you know it wasn't written in 2024. Ancient Egyptians worked the same way. The specific consonant structure used to spell Israel on the Berlin pedestal perfectly matches the spelling conventions of the 15th century Thutmose era. It does not match the spelling conventions of the later Ramesside era. This orthographic timestamp proves that the Egyptians recognized Israel as a distinct entity living in Canaan incredibly early.
Wow, so the spelling itself is a clue. But the ultimate alibi check, the single artifact that puts the final, undeniable nail in the coffin of the Ramesses II Hollywood theory, is an artifact called the Merneptah Stele. Break this down for us, because this is where the math just completely destroys the movie posters.
The Merneptah Stele is a massive, 10-foot-tall granite victory monument. It was erected by Pharaoh Merneptah. And who was Merneptah? He was the immediate son and successor of Ramesses II.
Okay, so we are in the era right after Ramesses the Great.
Exactly. The stele dates securely to 1208 BCE. On this towering monument, Merneptah is boasting about his various military conquests in the region of Canaan, and he famously declares, carved into the granite, "Israel is wasted, its seed is not."
Okay, let's do the hard math on this. If Ramesses II was the pharaoh of the Exodus, the Israelites would have been slaves in Egypt, building his cities sometime during his reign in the 1200s BCE.
Right.
Then they leave. But his own son, Merneptah, is already bragging about destroying the established, recognized nation of Israel and Canaan just a few years later in 1208 BCE.
The math simply does not work.
It is impossible. You cannot fit a 40-year wandering in the desert, a multi-year, grueling military conquest of Canaan under Joshua, the complex division of the land among the 12 tribes, the era of the judges, and the establishment of a recognized national presence that an Egyptian king would bother boasting about into that tiny microscopic window of time.
You really can't.
The Merneptah Stele is the ultimate alibi. It definitively proves that Israel was already a mature, established, deeply rooted presence in Canaan by the 13th century, which means they had to have left Egypt centuries earlier.
Exactly. When you step back and look at the whole board, the timelines, the stratigraphy, the linguistic borrowing, the psychological profiles, the 15th century timeline is the only one that harmonizes all the evidence.
So let's summarize this incredible sweeping journey we just took. We started with a ghost, a missing name, in a text that turned out to be a deliberate cultural and theological choice. We navigated past the Hollywood myth of Ramesses II by looking at the hard math of 1 Kings 6.1 and understanding how ancient scribes updated city names like anachronistic timestamps.
Right, and we proved the Israelites were physically there by finding the unique architecture of Semitic four-roomed houses and digging up domestic ledgers in Avaris filled with specific Hebrew names like Shifra.
We built a deep psychological profile of the Thutmose dynasty. The baby killer Thutmose I who normalized androcide, the rescuer Hatshepsut whose memory was violently erased with chisels, and the long-reigning dictator Thutmose III who forced Moses into a 40-year waiting game.
Which led us to our prime suspect, the cruel, sadistic Amenhotep II, a man who desperately grabbed 100,000 slaves in year 9 to save a collapsed economy, a man who abandoned a massive Semitic city, went completely silent for the last 15 years of his reign, left his temples unfinished, and died with a body covered in strange lesions, terrified of foreign magicians.
And we traced the multi-generational shockwaves of his catastrophic defeat. We saw his younger son inventing a dream from a sphinx to justify taking the throne of the dead firstborn. We saw his grandson desperately building 600 statues of the healing goddess to cope with the trauma. And we saw his great-grandson Akhenaten completely abolishing the ancient Egyptian religion because the gods had so clearly failed them.
From muddy waters to absolute, blinding clarity.
It is breathtaking when you put it all together, and I think this is the real value of doing a deep dive like this. It shows you that if you are willing to question popular assumptions, if you are willing to look past the movie posters and Charlton Heston, and actually dig into the cross-disciplinary clues like linguistics, mummy forensics, and stone stele, you can uncover a reality that is infinitely richer, more complex, and more thrilling than fiction. You learn to read the silences in history.
Because sometimes what a king goes out of his way not to write on his monuments tells you exactly what he is desperately trying to hide from the world.
That is so true. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over until next time. We spent a lot of time today talking about how the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, forced to make mud bricks, forced to build massive monuments covered in elite, complex Egyptian hieroglyphs. But deep in the turquoise mines of the Sinai Peninsula at a place called Serabit el-Qadim, archaeologists found something absolutely amazing. Carved into the rock walls of the mines, they found a script known as the Proto-Sinaitic alphabet.
It is widely considered by linguists to be the earliest known alphabetic script in human history.
And the incredible thing is, it was invented by Semitic laborers. These Semitic slaves working in the brutal darkness of the Egyptian mines looked at the complex, elitist hieroglyphs of their oppressors, symbols that took a lifetime of privileged schooling to read, and they ingeniously stripped them down.
It's brilliant.
They assigned a single sound to a simple symbol, turning hundreds of complex pictures into a simple phonetic alphabet that anyone could learn in a week. That exact Proto-Sinaitic script, born in the crucible of Egyptian slavery, is the direct ancestor of ancient Hebrew. It is likely the very alphabet that Moses used to write the Torah in the wilderness. Think about the profound poetic justice of that. The very letters you read today, the A, B, and C that form the foundational alphabet of all Western civilization, were literally born out of the ingenuity of slaves subverting the intellectual power of the empire that was trying to crush them. The Exodus wasn't just a physical escape of a marginalized people, it was the birth of the written word as we know it, taking the power of reading out of the hands of the elite pharaohs and giving it to the masses. Something to mull over until next time.
That wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for watching A Moment in Time podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe.